The United Nations launches a plan to eradicate cholera from Haiti. But is it anything more than a repackaging of previously pledged money? And why does the UN still refuse to admit it caused the outbreak? You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Ratansi. Haiti may have many problems, but until 2010, cholera was not one of them. In fact, the country had no known history of the disease at all. But that all changed in October of that year. And in the 25 months since, cholera has infected hundreds of thousands and killed close to 8,000. Last week, the United Nations Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon launched what was described as a new multi-billion-dollar effort to eradicate the disease in Haiti and the neighboring Dominican Republic. But it was subsequently pointed out that the plan is simply a repackaging of an already existing program that began nearly a year ago. What's more, the vast majority of what was billed as a $2.2 billion initiative is unfunded. Then there is the UN's continued refusal to admit that its troops were the source of the outbreak in the first place, something even backed up by UN-appointed scientists. Al Jazeera's correspondents have been at the forefront of determining the source of the outbreak. Here's a brief look at some of our reports.
UN soldiers working furiously to contain what looks like a sewage spill at this base in Haiti's rural heartland. We came here after rumours that Nepalese troops could be a source for the cholera outbreak. The disease is waterborne, and untreated waste running into a river is a big danger. And that's exactly what we found.
Are these toilets here? Are these toilets?
Yeah.
This is a toilet right here. What are you digging? Why are you digging here? Well, we're not being told exactly what's going on here, but it certainly smells like sewage. There are toilets right there, and the liquid seems to be draining into this river just a few meters away that flows into the nearby town of Mirebalais.
Local residents said they'd frequently seen sewage from the base leak into the river, and that families in the area had recently become ill.
It's only people downriver who have been infected. A child close to here died. Another family had 3 kids get diarrhea, and one died the same day.
From poor to desperate, cholera took not only Carolyn Pierre's husband, but also his income from farming.
We have 7 kids to take care of. I don't even want to tell you how bad it is for me.
In her village of Sodo, many have losses due to cholera, a deadly disease that until 2010, Haiti hadn't seen for nearly a century. They're among more than 5,000 people who filed a complaint with the United Nations peacekeeping operation known as MINUSTA, looking for compensation.
MINUSTA brought the disease. They should pay.
Several scientific studies point to this UN base as the place where cholera was introduced to Haiti. The unit of Nepalese soldiers suspected of carrying the bacteria have been quietly sent home. But Haitian courts have no jurisdiction over the UN. Under the UN's agreement with Haiti and other governments, only the UN can decide if and when it should pay damages. To make payouts, there has to be a standing claims commission. Now Al Jazeera has discovered the UN has never set one up, in Haiti or anywhere.
The UN has never accepted responsibility for the cholera epidemic, even though its own investigation found that the outbreak stemmed from this river, right next to its own base, which wasn't disposing of sewage properly.
The UN investigation found that Haiti's lack of water treatment facilities, made all the worse after a devastating earthquake, led to the rapid spread of the disease.
Interestingly, on Wednesday, Ban Ki-moon handed Kristen Salumi a UN Journalism Award for that report on the UN's links to the cholera outbreak in Haiti. She joins me now from the UN's headquarters in New York. Kristen, should we take that as some admission of culpability for the outbreak then?
Well, the award was actually granted by the UN Correspondents Association, which is not directly related to the United Nations. It's not managed or funded by the United Nations. It's a group of journalists who cover the United Nations who decided to give us the award. Although it is true that Ban Ki-moon was there to hand out the medals, which was a bit awkward for me and my team who worked on the story, because the report for which we were being honored actually has a scene where I'm chasing Ban Ki-moon down one of the hallways of the United Nations, trying to get him to answer the question and look at the new evidence, which shows pretty clearly that the United Nations peacekeeping mission is the link behind the cholera epidemic in Haiti. And at the time, he didn't stop and answer the question. He didn't answer the question last night either. The United Nations to this day does not accept any responsibility for bringing the cholera epidemic to Haiti.
Are they still even investigating, though, whether there is a link? Is there any internal investigation underway?
They have not, as far as we know, reopened the investigation into the cause of the cholera epidemic in Haiti. They stand by the old report, even though there's been this new evidence that's come to light since then. What they are looking at is a legal claim, the legal claim that was referred to in my report, filed on behalf of victims of the cholera epidemic, which seeks monetary damages, financial remuneration for the epidemic and its victims, as well as an apology from the United Nations and repairs to the water system, the sanitation system in Haiti, which is so bad that it contributed to the rapid spread of the epidemic in Haiti. So that legal claim continues to be looked at by the United Nations. It was filed over a year ago, and to date the UN has not responded in any way to the claim. When you ask about where it stands, they say that the legal department is still looking at it.
But at the very least, have they set up the Standing Claims Commission to hear claims and compensate victims, which frankly they were required to do anyway under the under their status of forces agreement in Haiti?
Well, what they say is that is part of what the legal department is looking at now, whether or not to set up this claims commission. What UN officials tell me off the record is that the Claims Commission is a standard kind of language that is put in the United Nations contract, not only with Haiti, but any country where it has a peacekeeping mission, as part of its deal with the host country to answer any questions of liability that may come up with peacekeepers there. When it comes to such a big liability issue like the cholera epidemic, if they were to acknowledge responsibility and set up this claims commission, it could be billions of dollars that they could be on the hook to compensate these victims. So the implications of such a large claim, for an epidemic that's caused over 7,000 deaths are just huge for the United Nations, not only in terms of the money that it would be involved in to compensate these victims, but also in terms of the precedent it would set for other peacekeeping missions, the UN's liability, and also the willingness of member states to contribute their peacekeepers to other operations around the world if there are these liability issues.
Let's take a little bit more of a detailed look at the UN's plan to eliminate cholera in Haiti and the Dominican Republic. It was reported that the UN aimed to spend $2.2 billion over the next 10 years. But hardly any of that money is available. The UN is contributing $23.5 million of new money, 1% of funds. It was announced that the fund would receive $215 million in donations from Spain, Japan, the World Bank, and the Inter-American Development Bank. But besides $800,000 donated by Japan following Hurricane Sandy, all of that money had been previously pledged and is now being refashioned as money for what was billed as the new cholera initiative. The UN has spent $118 million responding to the cholera outbreak to date, but this figure is a fraction of the $677 million budgeted by the UN for its military operations in Haiti for 2012-2013. Let's get some analysis. I'm joined from Boston by Dr. Rishi Ratan. He's the Advocacy Chair for Physicians for Haiti and briefs the United Nations on water infrastructure issues in particular, so particularly relevant. How welcome is this initiative then, Dr. Ratan?
Well, actually, the initiative is quite welcome. It's an important first step by the United Nations supporting this Haitian-directed and Haitian-derived plan. What's concerning about it is that it's taken 2 years for the United Nations to work with Haiti on this in a public fashion. And as you already mentioned, it's concerning as well that the funding for this plan is either non-existent or is being reappropriated from places where the funding has not already been distributed. That is to say that people have pledged funding and not distributed it. So there's nothing here to suggest what will be different about this pledge wherein the funds will actually be distributed.
But is the plan even new in the first place?
Well, it is actually a novel plan that the Haitian government and the Dominican government came together to work on. And it's quite broad sweeping and broad ranging.
But a year ago, right?
That's correct. This plan has been in the works for quite some time at the Haitian national level. And what the announcement really was by the Secretary General and the United Nations was coming out in support of this plan. But as you implied, the plan actually has been circulating for some time without any sort of UN response to it or support. And now that they have publicly supported this plan, making sure that they financially do that as well and reprioritize how they're spending their money, that is, moving it away from military and peacekeeping operations into actual life-saving operations for water security and water infrastructure, will continue to be an important part of the Haitian government and advocacy spheres.
You've worked with the UN, though, for many years. I mean, help us understand. Again, there's this impression that, given its previous prevarications on cholera, that even this was only, this initiative was only announced because of the pressure being piled on, that actually perhaps the UN didn't want to do anything after the cholera outbreak. I mean, again, is that a false impression that we're getting?
Well, I think the complications of that relate to how diverse the United Nations is. In my work behind the scenes at the United Nations, I have met many colleagues and allies that really want to work toward justice and accountability toward Haiti and its citizens. But they have, I think, on many levels at the secretariat level and the administrative and bureaucratic level, been stymied in their efforts to be honest and work toward justice. And I think that's been frustrating for everybody.
Who have they been stymied by there?
You know, it's hard to pin it on a single person. I think it's a general atmosphere from a top-down sort of level. Again, this is just the general sensation. There are not individuals that one can point to, but working with people who are working on the ground and trying to develop just solutions. I feel like they've been frustrated by the lack of public response by the United Nations. And indeed, I agree with you that the advocacy role played here over the last 2 years has been absolutely critical to push things forward in a somewhat expedited manner. That is to say, without that, in the first year, the United Nations response, while perhaps the humanitarian response was one that was laudable, the overall global United Nations response in terms of responding to the scientific evidence and updating their protocols based on the scientific evidence that both their independent commissioned panel as well as the scientific community reported on was lacking and continues to be lacking to this day.
Right,
and that's quite frustrating.
But even before the earthquake, so many billions had been spent in Haiti by the UN, and particularly, for example, in your field of water infrastructure. Things seem to be getting worse, even before the earthquake. I mean, why were things getting worse? Why is it? What is the problem?
Well, I think the problem is just a general opinion and idea and theory behind how we do aid in the developing world. And I think really what we need to think about is water as a human right. And when we talk about human rights, the government or the state is really the only agent that can sustainably and longitudinally sustain and secure those rights for its citizens. So you can throw all the money you want in the world at it, or at a problem, for example, water in Haiti, but if the majority of your money, as is the case, is going toward international NGOs and is not actually invested in the country itself and in the government,
right, but people have
you
said
have
this
a
for
crippled
years,
government
though.
That is.
But what do they say? I mean, and people, this has been pointed out, repeatedly. What do the UN officials say when you say this?
Well, I think it depends at what level they're at. I think the people on the ground on some level recognize the importance of the government, but I think that this is a general atmosphere of aid and development that starts at very high multilateral levels like the United Nations and goes down to the smallest NGOs that feel that if they go in with their funding, they can find a solution that's sustainable. And I think that Haiti is an example, but there are many others in this world that that sort of way of funding is not an appropriate way, and as you mentioned, and it is the truth, is that water security actually worsened in Haiti before the earthquake, and that was with funding coming to international sources. So I think we really need to rethink about how we fund global health problems and how we find those solutions. And I think it's important here that the United Nations is supporting the Haitian government-derived and directed solution, but so far it's in word only, and it will remain to be seen if they can put money where their mouth is.
So what should the UN do to help Haiti eradicate cholera? Joining me to discuss this from Raleigh, North Carolina, the journalist Jonathan Katz, who wrote the book The Big Truck That Went By, about the failure of the international community to help Haiti in the past. From Boston, Brian Concannon, director of the Institute for Justice and Democracy in Haiti. And here in the studio, Haitian radio host Yves Point-du-Jour. We did contact several UN departments, inviting them to take part in our discussion. All of them declined. Yves, first of all, then, looking at this plan that was announced by the UN Secretary General, what do you make of it?
That's the same old stuff that they try to bring to Haiti. The same old stuff that has not been working. UN knows fully well that they are responsible for the cholera in Haiti that has killed 8,000 people, and you have 600,000 more infected. As a matter of fact, if UN were a country, Ban Ki-moon should have been in The Hague in a jail cell for crimes committed against humanity. They know very well that when they brought those troops and that they were dropping faces in the river, that those rivers were used by Haitians as their drinking water and also for their farm animals and everything. They knew it. And yet, they brought those people from Nepal infected with the cholera epidemic and brought them to Haiti and created havoc in a country that has already, very weak in terms of infrastructure. They knew it, and they came out, and they came with them, and they did it. So now they refuse to face the music. They have to face the music, and they have to pay for the crimes that they have committed against humanity. And not only that, because we have to sue them, and we don't want no fake lawsuit that is suing them at the UN. We want to sue them in New York, like the Haitian Lawyers Leadership Network.
We'll talk about the lawsuit in a second with Brian Concannon. But Jonathan Katz, there is another way of looking at this, which is, look, at least the UN is now addressing the cholera epidemic. As Dr. Rattan was saying, this is a local initiative which the UN is getting on board with. And there are some, people like Paul Farmer of Partners in Health who are internationally respected, who you can trust. It's a start, isn't it?
I think that in many ways, unfortunately, it is the same old story, and not just with regard to the cholera epidemic specifically, but you look at the pledges, the new donations that Ban Ki-moon was announcing at this press conference on December 11th, $215 million from Spain, Japan, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the World Bank. Almost all of that money had originally been pledged at the Donors Conference at the United Nations in 2010, 3 months after the earthquake, which was 7 months before the cholera epidemic even began. So unfortunately, not just with regard to this one crisis, but in general, we're sort of seeing the same old patterns emerging in development of money getting repledged over and over for the same things, and promises being made that, if fulfilled, are going to be very important, but they've been unfulfilled in the past, and it's hard to be optimistic that all of them are going to be fulfilled.
Although having said that, though, the Center for Economic and Policy Research saw the benchmarks. They welcomed this actually, but they had concerns, and they've been very critical in the past. But they saw the document, and the benchmarks just talk about the achievement of a, quote, accelerated rate, end quote, of constructing sewer systems, water treatment plants, latrine septic tanks by 2015. The goal is simply an accelerated rate, and I guess the question is, what does that mean? Isn't this an emergency?
Look, if they can come through with what they're promising right now, it's going to be huge. And one of the interesting things about this announcement, even though it is repackaging, as you've been saying, an announcement from about a year ago, is that now the UN is putting its imprimatur on it, and they've put a dollar figure on this. They're saying it's going to be roughly $2.2 billion. So we now have a target out there. That's hopeful. If the pressure can be brought to bear, and the United Nations comes through with what they're promising right now, the money is actually spent these projects are actually accelerated. What I think everybody wants is to see these problems solved and solved permanently. So if you can get water and sanitation in Haiti, you know, that's great. These other questions about law and accountability, I think those are important as well. But there's a crisis going on right now. There's an emergency.
I know,
if they can do it, that will be great. But if it's an empty promise, it's totally meaningless.
But if the benchmarks themselves are so weak, you have to wonder. But we'll go into that perhaps on another occasion. Brian Concannon, you have, your organization is amongst those who have filed a suit against the UN. And as Yves was suggesting, that it is currently working its way through the UN system. You do wonder, do you think this is a response to your lawsuit?
I think it's a response to our lawsuit. I think it's a response to the critical reporting about the UN's role, including by Al Jazeera, which has taken a leadership on this. It's a response to activists all over the world who have decried the UN's failing to respond. I think it's also a response to people within the UN who are saying this is not why they work with the UN, that they don't think that the UN should be on the side of injustice and denying accountability for its actions.
Right, but I mean, your lawsuit and the charges are pretty specific. You know, they failed to screen their troops, to maintain sanitation facilities, that they've obscured investigations into the matter. Is this really, I mean, does this address any of those issues? And of course, then again, there are the problems with what has been announced in the first place.
It partially addresses it, and like Jonathan, I'd say if, there's a big if this does get implemented, it will address one of our three claims. We're asking for three things. The first is the provision of water and sanitation necessary to control the epidemic, to stop the killing. Second, it's compensation to Carolyn Pierre and the other victims that have lost everything or almost everything they had. And third is an apology, which hopefully will help make sure that this doesn't happen again to another country.
But I mean, as Yves was suggesting, though, this is still going through the UN system. What about civil, civil courts? When is the response going to be decided as not adequate, frankly?
So, subject to the status of forces agreement between Haiti and the UN, the UN has protection from national jurisdictions, but that protection is not absolute. If the UN is also required by the same agreement to provide an alternative mechanism for victims of malfeasance. And so what we've done is put the ball in the UN's court.
Right, and they've never set one of these up before.
You have to come up with a system. They never have.
Even though they're supposed to.
They've done other alternatives. They haven't done formal standing claims commissions, but they have come up with other mechanisms to give people compensation for their harms. It generally works better in small things like car accidents than it does on big issues like this.
Right.
And we're challenging the UN. We're saying, live up to your agreement, and if you don't, then we'll have the ability to go into a national court, whether it's in Haiti or New York or Europe. We're still working that out.
Yves.
But we will go into a national court, and we will say that the court should not enforce the immunity agreement.
Does that sound
No, that's a joke. Let me tell you something. For example, you take Dr. Paul Farmer, he's on the board of brand organizations, and he works for the UN. That's a joke. We want real lawsuit here to compensate Haitians. This is serious business here. Tired of that joke of people making joke out of us. It is serious. You know, live peoples have been destroyed, not only those who died, but also their families. And we have, that's true, we need to build an infrastructure, but they're playing game with us. And we see the pattern. We saw what happened with the Clinton Bush funds. So that's the same thing going on in Haiti. We're tired of it, and let them get the hell out of there. We can do this, we can build it. They are not part of the solution, they are part of the problem.
Brian Concannon, I mean, the suggestion then is...
I would say that...
very quickly, Jonathan.
No, I was just saying that this idea that perhaps a precedent could be set, I think is part of the reason why the UN has been so slow to come forward and consider its own accountability. If the status of forces agreement is allowed in this case to let a case go forward, the UN could be facing cases like this all over the world. Right. I don't think that's a small point.
Brian, we've only got a minute left, but we're going to have an extra 5 minutes on our internet version, which we'll have a little bit of an extended discussion. But for our broadcast edition, Brian, you better answer that in some ways perhaps your lawsuit is part of the complicity with the UN. It's not being serious enough.
I share Yves' frustration, but I think we have to take into account the legal reality. I don't think that anybody has ever successfully sued the UN in a national court without going through this process. If Yves or anybody else can let us know how we can get around that requirement, we'd be happy to take that shortcut. We just don't know how that can be done.
All right, we're going to leave it there for that broadcast edition of Inside Story Americas for the moment. We're going to have an extra 5 minutes on our internet version where we'll go into some more of the background at aljazeera.com. But that's it from the team in Washington, D.C. for now.